have you ever cleaned Powerline? The answer for me is no. I've never even really tried to clean the Powerline climb. How about you?
I have cleaned the Powerline climb, not during a race. While pre-riding, a few years ago, Rebecca Rush and I took a good-sized group out there, and we started going, and it was the only climb we did that day. It was just to show off the Powerline. And with all those people around me, I decided I was going to give it what I had to give, and I cleaned it. I cleaned the entirety of the Powerline.
3, 2, 1.
Leadville, the podcast for the 100-mile mountain bike race. It is the show that breaks down, builds up, gets you ready, and of course freaks you out for the highest and arguably the hardest one-day mountain bike race in the country. I am Michael Houghton, a.k.a. Hottie, a.k.a. Mr. 654, and with me is Eldon Fatty Nelson.
Hottie, episode 10 here, double digits, which means, of course, that as people listen to this, we are less than 3 weeks away from this race. And with 3 weeks to go, this show is starting to feel like a NASA-style countdown to 1. Boom. And this counting down to that shotgun blast. Boy, I swear, I need a paper bag or something to breathe in.
Or just try to calm down a little bit. You've got a lot on your plate, so mellow out a bit here, buddy. What is it that makes you so nervous for these races?
I don't know exactly. I mean, I feel it. I know that for sure. But maybe it's just the anxiety of the race, the unknown. It feels bad as I get close to race day. And it gets terrible when I get to those final couple hours and minutes of the race. I seriously feel like I am about to black out. People who know me joke about this sort of Jekyll Hyde transformation I do as races approach. I think you've probably seen it to a degree. You and I have stayed in the same buildings before Leadville as well as other races. I get so jumpy, so anxious, and just generally hard to be around. You don't have that problem, do you?
Yeah, not so much as the race gets closer, although I didn't really notice it with you so much. In fact, the Crusher, you seemed pretty good at the start line. I did notice it when we were in the house together at Leadville. Mm-hmm. The tension seemed to kind of elevate as race day got closer. Plus, you had a lot on your plate. You had family there. There was a lot going on. You were trying to do World Bicycle Relief stuff, too. Sure. So you had a lot on your plate. I actually, as the race gets closer for me, the more relaxed I get, especially when you get to Leadville. When I get in town in Leadville, I really start to relax there. The only thing I get a little worked up about is weather. I get a little obsessed with how's the weather going to play out. Is it going to rain? Because weather can really take a day and turn it on its ear. But what I just try to always, and I've said this before, Fatty, I try to look at races like Crusher or Leadville as just big group rides. Like, I'm just going for a big group ride on Saturday. It's going to be a lot of people there. It is going to be fun. And again, I hang those little spots out along the course that I'm looking forward to riding, whether it be Sugarloaf or the top section at Crusher. And that's what I try to geek myself out for. And then finally, come breakfast, man, I put something good on the plate, man. Pancakes, bacon, give me something good. Food is mood. And I just try to at that point, let all the preparation take over and just be calm.
That is some pretty good advice. I don't know why I get so freaked out. I don't think I'm super uncommon that way. There are people who just get super obsessed. We add way too much emotional or personal or whatever kind of investment of importance into these races. And it starts taking away from the fun of the thing. Last week, the night before Crusher, I was actually telling Lisa that I never wanted to race again. I was saying that in absolute seriousness. I was saying,
really?
This is the last year. After this year, we are not doing any more races ever again. I hate feeling like this. Let's just ride for fun from now on. And she was laughing and rolling her eyes because apparently I say this all the time. I just get super miserable as I get close to these races. And then the gun goes off and I have fun and everything is great. and I find myself signing up for the very next race. And it's, the cycle never ends.
Of course you do. Well, the good news is, regarding all your anxieties, is you never have to, at least this time, worry about your bike setup.
Yeah, this year, that is absolutely true. I'm not looking to jinx myself. And believe me, I am a strong believer in the power of the jinx. But neither my wife nor I have had a single second's worth of trouble of maintenance since we went 100% Shimano on our specialized epics at the beginning of the season. And I mean literally none. I mean, since the bikes were built up, no drivetrain adjusting, no brake dragging, no fiddling, and since the beginning of March, drivetrain battery charge each. Since March, we are getting 4 months on a charge, Hadi. It's crazy.
That is great.
It's great too. I mean, it's kind of weird. As a cyclist, you're really used to having to fiddle constantly with things. But with Shimano XT Di2 drivetrain and XT brakes and the cranks and pedals and basically just going whole hog Shimano, we don't have to fiddle. It's like Shimano's discovered that there are people who just want to spend their times riding, not wrenching.
Yep. Go to bike.shimano.com for more. We will also have a link in the show notes for this episode at Leadville100podcast.com. And now, as always, we go onto the course, the Leadville course. Each week, we are discussing a segment of the Leadville out and back format. We've been doing this in order, and so far we've made it through the last major feed at Pipeline, and now, after 79 miles, the race has begun because it is Powerline time. Your goal will now be decided right here, right now.
It's funny that you say, after 79 miles, your race has begun, because that is so absolutely 1,000% true. This is the most physically and mentally demanding part of the course. It is super easy to actually have your body stop working for you and to get demoralized. But it's also a place where you can have, moments of elation and exuberance that you are going to beat this thing, that you are going to finish this race. So, there's no way we can avoid building this thing up and making it sound big, because the fact is it is big. And all those matches that in other installments of the course segment that we've been telling you to save, it is time to get those matches out. You're going to be burning match after match after match on this 4 mile segment.
Yeah, you're going to light a fire here, and knowing the course and knowing what you're in for and how to tackle it is really going to help. This section requires riding and walking, knowing when to do which.
Yeah, and sometimes it is hard to tell. If a good way for you to be able to get a sense for what parts you can ride, which parts you can walk, although, of course, it's going to change when you're doing this with 80 miles of riding in your legs. But if you get to Leadville 5 or more days before the race, go and pre-ride this. It is more important to pre-ride the Powerline than it is to pre-ride Columbine. Caveat, if you get to Leadville 4 or fewer days before the race, don't go pre-riding anything big like this. You don't need to load your legs up with this kind of a climb 3 days before the race, right?
Yeah, not at all. I would stay off of both of those big climbs inside of 4 days before the race.
All right. Well, let's get to it. You are going to take a left off the pavement and take a look at your GPS. You should be at mile 79 on the nose. But, once again, check your GPS to see if there's a little variance on your own machine. I say this because from the left turn, it is exactly 4 miles from here to the summit. Look at your GPS, add 4 to that number. That number is your goal. It is so good to know this number, because there's going to come a time during the next however long it takes you to get up there that you are going to believe you are at the top, that you must be at the top. This feels like the top, but you are not at the top.
Yeah, we're talking a lot of false flats here. A lot of you think you're there, but you're not. It happens again and again and again. And if you somehow miss checking this mileage marker Fatty's giving you, the summit is going to be at mile 83 for any well-calibrated GPS.
Yep.
But we're not at 83 just yet. We're at 79, and these are 4 very tough miles. You made that turn off the pavement, and for about 4/10 of a mile, it's actually not that bad. In fact, there's people around you.
Yeah.
You're going to go through what used to be a creek. It's no longer. They actually filled it in now. So good dry spot. You make a right. Again, are on dirt at this point. Lots of people around. Lots of cheering. Then a left. And you'll be following that fence line. It was on your right as you came down the power line. Nice fence line. Oh, I love that fence, in fact. It looks very westerny there. But now you're going up the fence line again. This gradient so far, Fatty, not that bad.
No, it's not too bad. You will perhaps remember it from earlier in the morning when it was nice and cool and your legs were fresh, and you finished coming around that bend and you're on this straight downward slope that you could just open up your brakes and get to maybe your top speed on dirt for the whole day right there, just because it is a nice long straightaway. Now you're going to discover why you were going so fast, because it sort of slowly creeps up and the grade gets really tough. It's not bad yet, but you are going to find yourself in a lower gear than you would have expected because, of course, altitude and exhaustion. You are 80 plus miles now into this race, but you can stay on your bike for now.
Right. And Fatty, maybe this is a good time to answer a question I'm sure a lot of people are asking themselves about us and about anybody. Have you ever cleaned Powerline? The answer for me is no. I've never even really tried to clean the Powerline climb. How about you?
I have cleaned the Powerline climb, not during a race. While pre-riding, a few years ago, Rebecca Rush and I took a good-sized group out there, and I had great legs that year. That was the year that I did an 8:12 at Leadville, so it was the best that I've ever been. And we started going, and it was the only climb we did that day. It was just to show off the Powerline. And I was the person, Rebecca was sort of taking up the back. I was taking out the front. And with all those people around me, I decided I was going to give it what I had to give. And I cleaned it. I cleaned the entirety of the Powerline.
Yeah, I think a lot of first-timers, even strong riders, get a little obsessed with this. Like, I got to somehow clean Powerline, or that's somehow some kind of benchmark as to how fast you're going. Remember this, folks. Dave Weens walks Powerline.
Yeah.
Rebecca Rush on race day walks Powerline. There's very few people on race day that can clean this thing. Usually it's pros. I actually had one guy when I was crewing that year, Fatty, who finished under 8 hours, and he was a monster. This guy was a beast on the bike. He cleaned Powerline. He's one of like a handful of guys I personally know that can clean that thing on race day. In fact, I think it took so much out of him, he hasn't been back. So
yeah.
I start thinking about walking, getting off the bike long before I even have to get off the bike, because I know that cleaning Powerline is not within me. I'm not going to even try. Probably going to burn way more trying to do it than just getting off and walking. It's just going to cost you just too much.
Yeah.
Just attempting. It's really not worth it. You're probably just going to throw everything away there trying to clean that thing, as opposed to getting off and walking and just managing it and picking up or making up your time somewhere else. So, Fatty, that's why I start thinking about when I will get off before I have to.
Yeah. There are definitely better places to burn your matches, than on that incredibly steep section that begins right after you sort of curve around in a clockwise left sort of luge shoehorn. Where every time I go past that now, I think about one year there was a guy that Leadville legend Ricky McDonald, a friend of his, had come, and just a big guy in his blue jeans overalls, sitting on a stump or on a log and playing his banjo the whole day, so that everyone who rode by just saw this old guy, this old country guy playing his banjo just playing it beautifully. And it was such strange image, but also a really great image, and some music and some guy playing for you as you got to this impossibly steep section of the ride to climb. And I keep hoping that guy will come back someday.
So again, Fatty mentioned the luge section. That comes right after, you've come up the fence line, you're going to make a left, and now you're in what this I like to call the luge section as well. There's these sweeping turns that are banks. The ruts, the other thing comes back in here are the ruts. So you're going to see the ruts. Now, through that luge section, Fatty, I'm usually still on at this point, but I'm already contemplating the spot I want to get off. Again, there's no shortage of encouragement here.
Yeah.
You're going to see a lot of people around you, and they're all going to be encouraging you to stay on your bike. But I try to shut those people out. And as I come out of that luge section and still trying to dance between a couple of ruts, you start to crest up a little bit, and you're going to make a left, and the power poles are going to come into view. Usually I'm still on at this point, but as those power poles come into view, as I can start to see up the line of power poles that should be on the left side of the trail at this point, and the power lines are buzzing over my head, that's when I decide, okay, time to get off, and it's time to start hoofing it.
Yeah. I have never counted those power poles. It's interesting that you know exactly how many there are. I'm aware that they're there, and there's, sometimes the sound of that hum that is just a little bit disconcerting. But the way that I decide it's time to get off is when I just, I can tell that it is costing me more than it's earning me, right? So I'm just, that's when it's time to get off. I love, by the way, as you get into this section, this pushing section, and it's a painful time, and you're going so slow, and it's such high effort. And I mean, you're really leaning forward almost comically as you're slowly marching your bike up this incredibly steep hill. There are a lot of people out there just doing nice little things. There's usually someone or a group of people out there handing Dixie cups of water or Coke. There's a guy almost every year wearing a pizza slice costume, the pizza guy, who on hot days I've had him with a backpack mister running alongside riders and spraying them with that mister. Just nice little things and kind of, giving you encouragement in kind of an awesome way. It's a great vibe and a great way to kind of encourage people who are frankly suffering pretty hard up this race.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, walking is suffering in this case. I've never timed this walking section, so I can't even give people a good estimate of how long it takes.
It's forever long is how long it is.
Yeah, depending on where you're going to remount. Here's something to be careful of, though. While we said that most people will not be cleaning Powerline, and it's not a great idea for most people, that you're likely to have somebody coming up from behind you trying to ride this section. So just be careful there, and they should be shouting out, or some of the fans or the people lining the Powerline section will probably yell to you that, hey, rider back or rider. Just listen for that and be cognizant that people could be coming up behind you. Fatty, do you have any type of tactic or any type of way that you like to walk up this section? Do you like to stand on top of those or walk on top of the ruts and try to get your bike across the other side of the rut? Is there a way you like to do it? Do you like a side of this section here?
I can't profess any tactic. I'm not thinking smart enough to do anything like that. I am always to the left of my bicycle. I'm more comfortable that way. Beyond that, I would say that I am more likely to try to be, high. If there is either my bike or I am going to have to be lower or higher than the other, I'd rather have my bike be lower than me. Up to a point, unless I'm having to, bend over to get to it. I'm just trying to make it easier. I don't have any clever ideas. How about you, Hadi? You got anything on this one?
I think like going down Powerline, going up, you want to just stay out of the ruts. And that can be tricky because sometimes that means you're going to be standing on one side of a rut or walking on one side. Your bike might be on the other. It could be a little tricky. So I think that's just like a general rule as you're walking up. Like we said, I look for that third power pole. And I try to walk to that third power pole. And generally, that's where I'm going to get on again. In between the bottom section of the top, usually there's 2 soda hand-ups going on between there. It's either going to be root beer or Pepsi or Coke. I forget what those volunteers hand out there.
Take anything I get.
I take anything I get, too. I'll take a push. Some people will help push, especially people who are pedaling. Usually we'll get a push.
Oh, yeah.
So about that third power pole, I'll try to jump back on again, provided I've recovered. Sometimes I'll even stop and just take a few deep breaths right there and just kind of let things. Because the walking your heart rate will stay up surprisingly high as you're walking.
You're working plenty hard. You're still racing. You're just doing it a different way.
Yeah, and then getting back, of course, remounting on an incline like that is always tricky. I think I always upshift a little bit, put that thing in some extra gear, so it's just a little harder than you would want it to be normally, just to get your bike moving and moving forward again. Again, about that third power pole, I'm going to get on. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. Mostly which is because it's not quite as steep here at the third power pole, and because this is when a lot of the bad terrain really starts to disappear. The thing about the Powerline is the way they cut those power poles, they go straight down the mountain. And to access them, they had to cut a road, right? They had to cut something up so vehicles could get up or something. And then the rains come down and they tear up that access road, and it turned into a rutted mess after a while.
Yeah.
And so it's about that third power pole where I find the terrain, the dirt itself improves enough so that I can remount and start pedaling a little bit. It's still steep, but the grip is just a little bit better. And again, I start pushing ahead. And of course, the first thing you're going to run into, Fatty, is one of those things we already talked about, a false summit.
Yeah.
About mile 80. It's a bona fide downhill after that, but that false summit will fool you.
Yeah, that little downhill is only for a second. Yeah, and don't believe that your eyes are telling you that this is it, because the majority of the climb, you're only a mile 80 of 8, you're climbing to 83, so you've got a lot to go. You are looking at 11,200 feet. That's the altitude that you are pushing to. It's high enough that you are going to lose some power for sure.
Yeah, a lot of people talk about the top of Columbine as being this point of no return, but a real desperation point. But the Powerline is not to be fooled with. I think if there wasn't a Columbine out there, everyone would talk about how high Powerline is, and you go over it twice. So there's a lot to deal with, and that's why you're going to notice. Well, you're going to notice a couple things as you remount, or where I remount at least, at that third power pole and start to move on forward. Is you're going to lose the fan support. The fans only make it up so far. There'll be a few more up there scattered about, but you're going to lose a lot of the crowd. But it just becomes this solitary thing. It's you, your bike, your breathing, and maybe a couple of other riders from here on forward, Fatty.
Yeah, it's a little bit meditative. Just you, your bike, the suffering, your breathing, and the sound probably of your chain grinding at least just a little bit. You've been riding in likely dry conditions for a long time. Chances are your drivetrain isn't going to sound perfect anymore. I've seen people, I've been caught by people here. I have caught people here. Generally, there is not, I don't care about those people as they go by, and I encourage them, congratulations. And it tends to be mutual. There's just a lot of respect for everyone on the course at this point that you have done this. I will say that once I've got back on the bike, even on a single speed, it's possible to clean the rest of this. You just have to gauge, is this worth doing? And also ask yourself the question, am I on the verge of a cramp? And if so, then, some little grunt that you normally would go ahead and do, maybe consider walking it so that you don't send yourself over the edge and into the cramps. I have been locked up with both legs cramping, hams, quads, and calves, just completely debilitated on this climb before. And if that does happen, and, if it's a hot day and if you were exhausted and you've been pushing yourself, evaluate what you can do. Can you walk at that time? If you can you're still moving, and that's better than not moving, right? If not, can you eat and drink? Because those are going to help with the cramps. It might be a hydration-induced cramp. Do you have stuff to help you with cramps, like pickle juice? One of the things from the feed that I've been talking about. And I'll talk about it a little bit more as we get into our sponsorship spot for the feed. Electrolyte capsules. I ate a bunch of those right before I got to the Cold to Crush at the Crusher last year. And I always take a handful of those right before I turn off the pavement to the Powerline to sort of stave off any kind of cramp.
Yep. catching people and being caught, as both happened to me here, Fatty, as you just mentioned. I was actually caught by Eldon Fatty Nelson on this one year. I think you were on your single speed, too. Yeah, I was grinding out of that thing, and I heard you come by, and I yelled out your name or something like that, and you grunted and kept going and just nodded a lot. Yeah. And I've caught people here. I've caught people I was pacing here. I've caught teammates here, so it can go both ways. This is just a very tough section, and everyone kind of reacts to it differently. Like Fatty said earlier, you go over a false flat, and after that false flat and that downhill, this is pretty much a climb for most of the way. Yeah, some steep, rocky sections that will definitely test you. You're probably going to remember them from going down, too. And they were tough going down in the morning, just what it took to navigate them. Now, going up, again, you're going to have to move your bike around quite a bit, considering this is just a climb and you just want to climb straight ahead. You're going to be prepared. You have to be prepared to maneuver your bike a little bit because there can be some big rocks left on this top section of Powerline. So, again, steep, rocky sections, low speeds, walk if you need to, but keep riding if you can. I've had pretty good success here riding. Again, don't crash. I mean, you don't want to fall over. Don't ride at the expense of falling over. Yeah. But if you can keep moving forward, pedaling, staying on your bike, that's great.
Yeah.
While don't get too excited, though, because, again, there's some false summits. It's a little hard to tell exactly when you're at the top. Even though you've already seen this section of the course, you're going to be duped into thinking, oh, around that corner, I'm at the top. Not quite. Pay attention to that odometer, like Fatty said. You're looking for that mile 83. And again, take advantage of the moments where you are briefly going flat or downhill. It does level off at times real quick. Eat, drink. This is the hardest part of the race for sure, and it's not easy to keep fueling, so you kind of got to keep focusing on that while you're in this section here. But you've got 2 more climbs ahead of you after you're done with the Powerline. After you're done with this one. So it's important now to keep kind of topping off those fuels. You're hearing people talk about this in the Tour de France. They're just topping off his fuels. They talk about this in the Tour de France all the time. It's no different here. You want to just keep topping off so you're ready for those climbs just ahead of you.
Yep. What you do now is going to affect how the climbs ahead of you are going to go for you. So, little good news, just in case we've truly freaked you out about this part of the race. The final mile to the summit is considerably easier than the 2.5 miles that you've just ridden. There are still some steep momentary grunts, and you'll remember them as you get to them. But getting from mile 82 to mile 83 is a lot easier than mile 81 to 82. And when you get to mile 83, congratulate yourself, because you have just finished with what is without question the crux of the race, the toughest part of the race. You've climbed about 2,000 feet to 11,200 feet in 4 miles, with 80 miles of racing already in your legs. That is not nothing. That is a pretty legit accomplishment.
But don't pack your back for too long, because you've got 20 more miles of racing ahead of you, starting with the rocky Sugarloaf descent, which is what, along with Hagerman's, and the climb to Carter 8 is what we'll talk about next time on the course.
Hottie, we're going to be talking with Rebecca Rush about descending in our Questions for the Queen segment. But before we do that, I want to talk about the wheel company that sponsors Reba, Envy. And I also want to ask you how you feel about descending.
Well, descending at Leadville, actually, I feel much better than when I first showed up there. And I credit a lot of that with riding rigid bikes, whether it be a rigid hardtail or a gravel bike. It's really taught me to control my speed and be a little more precise with my descending. And I actually went from being passed at Leadville on a majority occasion to being a decent passer, actually getting around people at Leadville and no longer being left in the dust. So I feel pretty proud about that, and I'm glad I've always been able to descend at Leadville and not make huge mistakes.
Nice.
How about you, Fatty? You've said a time or two that you're kind of a timid descender.
Yeah, I am by nature. It is something that I still struggle with and will probably struggle with forever to a degree. That said, this year has been different for me, and a lot of credit goes to my full suspension, a specialized Epic. So it's interesting that rigid is kind of what was your breakthrough device. For me, riding with full suspension has been amazing. And I would say even more than that has been the Envy 525 wheels. These super wide, no pinch wheels are incredibly confidence inspiring. For the first time ever at the Crusher last week, I was passing people on descents. That has never, ever happened before at this race, no matter how many. I think I've done it. This was like my 5th or 6th time. Never passed people on descents. This year, I never got passed on descents. I'm setting PRs on descents on Strava in all of my normal training rides. And, and this has nothing to do with envy, but it's good that I am faster on descents now because I'm about 10 pounds heavier than I was last year. So I'm not setting PRs on climbs, but, obviously not envy's fault. I think that's Ben and Jerry's fault, to be honest.
Well, you can learn more about all of Envy's wheels and components, many of which seem like they're made with the Leadville 100 in mind, but of course can handle pretty much anything you throw at them in any terrain. Just go to Envy, that's ENVE.com.
Your women's champion, Rebecca Rush from Ketchum, Idaho. Welcome back, Rebecca.
Okay, Fatty, the 4-time Leadville Trail 100 champ, Rebecca Rush, standing by. It is time for questions for the Queen.
Reba, thanks for answering some questions for the Queen.
I am happy to be back.
Let's talk about descending today.
Awesome. There's good descents in Leadville. They're so fun.
There are. And some people really look forward to them. And then there are people who are like me and like Lisa, who are not born descenders, who just aren't wired that way. For people who are great descenders, there's probably nothing you need to teach them. But there are probably some little tips that you can give to people who are maybe less comfortable in rutted, sandy, technical descents or descents where there are people who are walking up on the other side of the trail that maybe you can share. What are the things you tell people about getting through the descents if you're not a born comfortable descent?
Yeah, I think first some of it is attitude because this is no secret. I'm not a born, fabulous descender either. I found mountain biking, in my 30s and was always better going up than down. And so part of it is your attitude. And instead of coming up and just going, oh gosh, this is terrible. There's a lot to be said for relaxing, saying I can do this, I got it, I'm fine. So there is a lot to your attitude as you roll over the top and, coming down, Powerline, for example, where it's still quite trafficky. And, so I have a little strategy where I kind of shake my head and let out, take a deep breath and just go, okay, I got this. So that's the one thing that you can do that doesn't really take any practice. But now we're early enough before the race, it's coming up, but people still have time to actually practice their descending. And I find a lot of athletes, especially endurance athletes, they're very regimented about their training peaks, doing their intervals, have a coach, all that. And very few people practice descending and practice their weaknesses. So it does feel like you're missing out on, a day where you could go do intervals if you're practicing descending. But I'll tell you, it's going to be, we talked about getting magic minutes, in one of the previous episodes. This is a place where you can also get magic minutes if you just do a little bit of practice ahead of time. I've learned from my husband, I follow him a lot. So a good way to practice descending is following somebody that you trust. Yeah. You like their line, they're not going to choose anything crazy, and they're going to go slowly enough that you could still see them, watch their line choice, watch their body position. So any chance I get, I try to ride behind him. If anyone is near a ski area, a great way to practice descending is to buy a lift ticket in the summer and do some laps where you don't have to ride up. You are just descending on the same trail over and over and over again. That's a great way to really cement some of those skills, is to get some practice. In the race day, once you're there, like I said, taking a deep breath, relaxing, realizing it is an opportunity to rest. You aren't pedaling on the descents. And so, when Lisa and I were riding, I, was behind her, yelling over into her ears, relax, relax your hands, your face, everything that's not actually doing anything should be relaxing.
Right.
And taking deep belly breaths, because it is a great place to recover if you're not completely stressed out. And I would say you don't have to haul down those things. Steady and relaxed is quick. Whereas if you're hauling and slide out a corner and you're out of control, one, that could end your race if you have a crash. It could end somebody else's race if you veer over into that oncoming traffic. And it's just not safe. So when you're there on race day, relax, but go a speed that is comfortable for you. And the places to push it are, the flatter, faster sections where you're like, okay, I got this. The place to actually really, learn new technique and really push out of your comfort zone is not in the, top baby head section of Columbine. That's a place to be relaxed and just get down and be safe. And, there might be people passing you. I think what a lot of people feel nervous about if they aren't good descenders is that people want to pass them and they feel like they're going to get in the way and they feel badly about that. And my advice to that is just to hold your line very consistently and be predictable. And if you hear someone coming up behind you, on your left, just, if you can, slightly safely move right. But if you can't, you just hold your line and let them know, I hear you. I'll pull over when I can. And I think that's a lot of people's fear when they're descending is they're going to get in somebody else's way. Communication is key on that from the rider who is approaching and the rider who is, in front needing to be passed. Is if you acknowledge, I hear you, I will pull over, I'm staying right. That goes a long way. Yeah, the race is not won on the descents. It's great if you feel confident and you can get a breather and you can relax, but the race is not won there. The race most definitely has been lost there for some people. And so the confidence and relaxing and getting it through the best you can is really the strategy. But do some practice, because when you are a good descender, it's actually really fun and you look forward to those sections of the race instead of dreading them.
Thanks so much for answering some questions for the Queen.
Happy to share it.
Let's end this segment with a quick plug for Rebecca's Private Idaho. It's a great race, now with a stage race component and a fun way to extend your season once you finish the Leadville 100. Check out Rebecca'sPrivateIdaho.com for more info. We talked last show about how Crusher in the Tusher is a good tune-up for Leadville in the Rockies. Not so much for equipment, but for fitness and especially food. Crusher was a great opportunity to try fuels and hydration you hope to put in play in Leadville. The Morton drink mix supplied by the feed was one of my main sources of drink and calories for Crusher in the Tusher, and I have to say it worked great.
Yeah, me too, Hottie. I started the race with 2 bottles of Morton 320, which, add that up, 640 calories just by drinking. I can tell you, I was bummed when I finished those and had to switch over to the mix that the race was providing for hand-ups. I don't even know what the brand was. Don't care. But it was not the same. I will tell you that. I also used a pickle juice as I was riding up the Col de Crush, that monster of a climb that is always littered with cramping cyclists. Did you see that? I mean, I assume that what you saw is what I saw. People actually on the side of the road stopped and massaging and stretching and, just miserable beyond belief.
Yeah, begging for any type of electrolyte or throw me something, please. Yep. Here, pickle juice.
Yeah, if I had brought 2, I would have given one up, but I had to be selfish. I felt something coming on in my hams, that pre-cramp twinge that tells you that, that some misery is in your future. I took out the pickle juice in my center jersey pocket, drank it down, no cramps.
Well, our podcast listeners can get a great price on the training and racing packs, custom curated for Leadville racers. Go to thefeed.com/Leadville for the race pack, and there's a link there on that page to go to the training pack. And be sure to use that code Leadville15 for a 15% discount on either of those boxes.
Yeah, and you can also use that Leadville15 code anytime you're buying any amount of Morton. So even if you're not buying one of our training or racing boxes, you can still go use that code when buying Morton and get a 15% discount. Highly recommend that product. It sounds like both of us do, Hottie.
Oh, love that product. Again, thefeed.com/Leadville. Use the Leadville15 code at checkout. we're going to talk about gear again, but not gear choices, Fatty. By now, there should be no choices left. The setup should be finalized, bike setup. This is about getting your bike ready, and even if you added those new bits here and there, you want to prep those components again, as they've probably been knocked around a little during training.
Yeah. It's time to start thinking about and going through, making sure the bike you have is ready to roll, that you're going to have a mechanical-free day. Think over what you need, what has to be done, and to check over your bike just, component by component before you head to Leadville. For this, I wanted to bring in a good friend of mine and the guy who has actually been working on my bikes for 2 full decades. I checked. His name is Racer Jared Gibson, and he has a mobile bike service called Racer Cycle Service. It's sort of like the second iteration or third iteration of his bike service company. No, he's been a pro bike wrench. He just takes care of bikes like no one I have ever met. He just knows them cold. Frankly, there's just no one that I trust more with my bike. Hadi, I'd like to introduce you to Racer of Racer Cycle Service. He has been doing my bikes for, 2 decades now? Is that right, Racer?
Pretty close, 20 years.
Holy cow. We were just young kids when Racer became the mechanic that I would drive past, I think, 10 other bicycle shops to do the work on my bikes. However, I don't have to introduce him to you because you met him last week at the Crusher and the Tusher.
We met actually in the middle of a crisis, but a crisis that Racer was able to solve. We'll get into that probably a little later, but yeah. Good talking to you again, Racer. And again, thanks for all your help, not only on Fatty's bikes, but helping us out in Beaver, Utah.
You are very welcome.
So let's talk a little bit. I think it's a good way to introduce this. So I got an early morning text from you for the friend that you had come to Beaver, Utah to race with. And he, in his new car with his new rack with new wheels, had not realized that with a dual exhaust on his turbocharged engine, that he was going to melt the rims off both wheels on his bike. Do I have that about right?
It's basically right. Not turboed, but supercharged.
Supercharged,
yeah,
turbocharged.
Supercharged. And the exhaust tips pointed just correctly where it was blowing hot exhaust on a hot day on the carbon wheels. And what can happen, and actually I'd read about this not in the context of a Kuat style rack or a tray style rack, but on racks where you hang your bike, and your bike can hang, say, trunk side or on the back of a hatch or whatever, and the wheels can hang just low enough that they can get in front of the exhaust and close enough, where the bike is right against the panel of the car. And I'd read a couple years ago that some people had some problems with that, but everyone said, no, the tray racks are fine, you're in good shape, there's enough distance between exhaust and your wheels that there shouldn't be any problem. Nope, not the case.
Not the case.
And when hot exhaust is coming out and pushing against carbon wheels, it's not the carbon that melts, they delaminate. So
right.
The glue, the resin that holds the carbon together actually liquefies, and then the wheels warp, and then the way you notice is you have a flat tire. And sure enough, my buddy pulled his bike off the rack when we arrived in Beaver, and he had a front flat. And we quickly realized that wasn't a puncture, but it was a warped carbon wheel. So we went into crisis mode, and that's why you got an email.
Yeah, and Racer, I, of course, texted you right away, and I don't even remember exactly the questions you asked, but they were the right questions so that we were able to get Hadi's friend rolling again the very next day.
Yeah, we were luckily I had a pair of spare wheels on my spare gravel bike and pulled them off, got the right end caps on those wheels, the right free hub body on it.
End caps stolen from my mountain bike, which you remembered were the correct ones for what his bike would need. And it's thinking like that actually makes Racer the guy that I go to. And we're not just I didn't want to bring Racer here just to talk about disasters that can happen, but more about preventing disasters now that everyone is starting to think about getting their bikes to Leadville and ready for the big day. So, Racer, Every year, it's part of the Leadville ritual for me. I bring my mountain bike over to you, and all I say now, I don't have to say anything. You can tell by the calendar, but I say, give it the once over. What does that once over mean? This evaluation to make sure that my bike is going to be good for the race.
Basically, it's not a whole lot different than what we do every time we go through your bike, because every ride is important.
No, fair enough.
Maybe before Leadville, we'll look at things a little more in depth, because we know it's a long race, so the bike, your brake pads, everything have to hold up through the whole event, not just for a 35-mile training ride.
So top to bottom, what do you look at?
I already mentioned brake pads. That's a big thing, something that can wear out. But really, start at the wheels. Make sure your tires are in good shape. Make sure you have good tire sealant, that it's fresh. And I usually would put new fresh sealant in. Before we do that, I mean, time frame. You should be doing this not the day before you leave, but a week before you leave, so you have enough time to get it done and recheck any problems.
And correct anything that is wrong. Now, in addition to things like to tires and to sealant and so forth, both of which are very important, and both of which actually you noticed as having problems on my bike right before the Crusher and the Tusher, that I was missing several knobs on my knobbies. How about the frame itself? Do you actually go over that, or would you recommend racers take a look at that?
Just to break it down into three parts: you clean it, lubricate everything, and adjust it. So part of that cleaning process, you wipe down the frame. As you do that, you look at it and you try and see what you can see. Look for any issues. Is
this something you would recommend racers themselves do, or is this something that only a trained mechanic ought to be?
Well, everybody should be cleaning their own bike at least every couple rides.
I've never cleaned a bike.
God. Oh, no.
And that's why I come to your house.
I know. I think it's true what they say, Fatty. A clean bike is a fast bike. And we have a mechanic here who can now vouch for that. So clean your bike, because it'll be a faster bike. Racer, I want to backtrack back to brakes real quick. I've been into Cycles of Life I don't know how many times, and that's the shop in Leadville. By the way, they're very good folks. If you do end up with a situation where you need something fixed and you're in Leadville and you don't have Racer there to help bail you out, go into Cycles of Life. They're great, and they're used to it too. They get killed the week of Leadville, and they just have come to expect it. But inevitably, when I go in there, Racer, I see other people in there lined up, and the main issue folks seem to be having revolves around brakes. Something has changed in transit between where they came from, usually at some elevation much lower than 10,000 feet, to now where they feel like their brakes aren't reacting the way they should. What happens when we go high up to our brake lines or our braking systems?
There's a small change in air pressure. Just the same reason you don't have any oxygen up there. It can change the balance of pressure between stuff sealed inside your bike versus the ambient pressure. And it's not a big change, but it is something that can cause small bubbles in your brake lines to expand. A lot of times it's just the motion of transporting it or how your bike is transported. If you have to ship it there and it's unboxed and your brake levers are on their side or something, a bubble can work into the lines.
So if I have you bleed my brakes before I go to Leadville, could I still run into an issue once I get there?
Yes, because there is a small amount of air that will usually stay in the reservoir in the brake lever. You try and get all that out, but it's really almost impossible to get every last little bit of air out of there.
So obviously, I guess the point being here is, folks, when you get to Leadville and unpack your bike or offload your bike from the rack, go ahead, go for a ride right away and start pulling on them brake levers and see what you've got. And if you don't have much, or if things feel soft or squishy, or they're packing up, you get that packed up feeling sometimes, head on into Cycles of Life and see if they can't help you out.
While we're on the subject of the changes in air pressure, how about in your shocks for your fork as well as for your rear suspension if you have that? Does the change in air pressure affect that? Is that something that you ought to be adjusting once you get to Leadville?
It's a small change. Mm-hmm. Lighter riders will probably notice it more.
So probably worth at least getting out your pump shock and seeing.
Get out your shock pump.
whether you are okay and whether it needs to be adjusted. Any tips or suggestions for the folks who are going to be flying their bike to Leadville? Racer, how much should someone tip their mechanic for a good mechanical-free Leadville 100 where everything went well?
I've always just gone by that's 15% type.
You're stingy. I don't know the last time I tipped a waiter 15%.
I'm a bad person to ask because like my credit card processing has a tip screen on it, and I just always bypass that. I just enter 0 and then hand the processing to my customers.
I'm going to answer for you. I'm going to say $50.
$50.
If you had a good race, you owe your mechanic $50. Does that sound about right, Hottie?
Yeah, I think that's totally. Don't do beer, by the way. I mean, they like to drink beer, mechanics do, but really what pays the bills, it's not an IPA, it's cash.
Yep.
So give them cash. If they want to buy beer with that cash, great, but give them cash. I know we all want to give beer. I gave beer once. Fatty, let me tell, before we leave, let's bring this thing full circle again. We started talking about what to do in a crisis and how Racer was to help us during a crisis. And things can come up mechanically. You can get into Leadville, and you both have heard this story, and I may have told this story already to this audience, but it's worth telling again. I got into Leadville. My race bike was ready. It was prepped, and I was out on a training ride and came back into town and went, why is my whole bike buzzing so much? It is buzzing every time I brake. Well, it turns out that buzzing was vibration, and that vibration was a crack in a seat stay. I discovered this on a Tuesday. The race was Saturday. And I was able to race Saturday on a bike that was shipped to me by my mechanic, actually, from L.A. Same bike, hardtail, that I was ready to ride, 29er hardtail. It all worked out in the end. But during that moment, just like we had Fatty up in Beaver, Utah, during the moment when it was going down, it was a full-on crisis.
Oh, yeah.
And I think the point being is that if you do have a crisis or something goes wrong, try not to panic, even though you think your whole Leadville is going to go up in flames. The first thing you want to do is start finding options, and not just one. I mean, I was able to find in Leadville three options. I had the potential of riding a bike a buddy of mine had brought up. Actually, it was my bike. It was a 26-inch full suspension bike. I had a Yeti, an aluminum Yeti that was really heavy, but I could have ridden it and had an okay day. I could have driven to Golden, Colorado and picked up a full suspension Epic. But in the end, it turned out that my mechanic boxed up and sent me almost an identical hardtail 29er to Leadville. He overnighted the thing, and I was able to build it up and race it and went on to achieve my goal. But in addition to finding a bike like mine, I found 3 other options. And we did the same, Fatty, in Beaver, Utah, when my buddy ran into problems with his wheels. He pulls his bike off. He has melted wheels. What do? First, we email Fatty, because Fatty is not yet in Beaver, and he's coming down, and maybe he's got something in his garage. Maybe he's got an idea. Who knows? Fatty got the first call. While Fatty was arranging things with Racer to get wheels to my buddy, I proceeded to move around the expo area and try to find other options in case these wheels didn't work out. Who knows? Yeah. Maybe we get them into town and something doesn't work right, fit right, whatever. I found a bike company that was willing to loan my buddy an entire bike.
Nice.
Additionally, there was a tire company, Panaracer, in Beaver for Crusher, who had wheels set up with Panaracers on them, obviously, and they were willing to loan wheels should we need them. So if crisis happens, just remember, find options. What can you do? What are not just one thing that are going to bail you out, but maybe 2 or 3 things that are going to fix this problem? Because in the end, then one of them will work, and you'll be able to finish your race.
When you were in Leadville, the thing is, there are going to be approximately 2,000 other racers and a lot of bike companies around. So if something happens to your bike in the days before the race, there is a good chance that you will, by asking around, making some friendly inquiries, be able to come up with a plan A, B, and C in short order. We should all knock on collective wood because we've been discussing things that I would typically say are jinxing. Racer, it's been great talking with you. And Thanks for taking care of my bikes all these years.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Again, thanks to Racer. That's Racer Jared Gibson of Racer's Cycle Service. Check him out if you're in the Utah area, anywhere near Alpine or Fatty. Fatty, I'm going to say it again for Racer. Go clean your bike, would you please?
I promise.
The man just wants you to be on a fast, clean bike. That's all.
Okay. Fair enough. Okay. I will for you and him.
I'll buy you some brushes and some soap. How's that sound?
Serious?
That good?
We need a bike cleaning sponsor.
That's what we got. Okay. Patty, our bike prep feature should also include a final check of what we'll carry on race day before we get to washing bikes. Let's talk about one other thing, and that is the cases we use to carry our stuff for flat repair. You got to make it a Banjo's Brother bag.
Oh, you absolutely do. You know, I can fit everything I need to fix a flat in their small seat bag. That is a lever. It goes in one little sleeve in the bag. The CO2 goes in another. And I mean, I'm talking a 20. That fits right in there. And then a tube in the main compartment, 29-inch tube. Chuck in the little sewn-in flap on the door. Truly everything you need, nothing you don't bag. It is great for one tire change, and you're good to go.
Yeah, I saw that bag up close and personal at Crusher. I could tell it'd been around the block a few times.
Oh, yeah.
That baby was still hanging on, which was great. Look, Banjo Brothers, they're tough, practical, and affordable, Minneapolis-based. They've been around since 2003, so they got reputation. To get 20% off your order, go to banjobrothers.com/fatty-favorites and sign up to be on their email list.
Yep, 20% for an email address. It is a bargain.
Every week, we bring in Trainer Roads coach Jonathan Lee for tips on what to do and what not to do when training for the Leadville 100.
Jonathan Lee of Trainer Road, it is great to have you back. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Eldon. Doing well.
How's that knee doing?
It's a lot of PT. It's the type of PT that doesn't feel like you're doing a whole lot of work, but it's kind of awkward because it's neuromuscular stuff. So I'm basically like, imagine looking at your hand and you say open and it just closes. And then you say to close and it opens back up. I'm rewiring the body. So a lot of patience is required right now, but it's on its way.
Well, I should say that I am recording this particular segment from my beautiful bed and breakfast in Leadville, Colorado, where I am getting some experience with high altitude. It's an easy thing to do, a quick trip from Utah. However, it's not something that everyone can do very easily, at least. So do you have any recommendations as to how people might be able to get ready for a high altitude experience in the Leadville 100?
Oh, yeah, that's a great point. There are a number of factors, and I'll try to make this pretty succinct. I could go on for too long about this, that's for certain. So, first of all, with elevation training, basically what you're dealing with is a decrease in pressure, right? So you basically have air that's less dense and thusly less readily available oxygen for your body to take in. As a result, what ends up happening is that your body is just limited on how much oxygen it has available to uptake in your body and utilize. So that's really what happens there. Now, that has a cascading array of effects on the human body, right? Everything from just, wow, I feel out of breath a little bit sooner, or, whoa, it's really hard to recover from that hard effort, to, on the extreme end of things, we're talking about decreased cognitive ability, to, extreme dangers, everything else like that. When you get into the really high elevation stuff, much higher than what Leadville is, it's a whole different beast. However, it's interesting. A lot of people, the term elevation training is tossed around pretty regularly, and people do these high elevation camps, and they can be super beneficial. But there are certain things that people don't think of, and I think that a lot of the time they just think, we're up high, we're good, we're getting the work done. But basically, a couple things that I just want to point out for people. Number one, they usually say that the ideal elevation is somewhere in between 6,000 and 8,000 feet. That's usually where you find like the sweet spot in terms of training, where you get adaptation in terms of your body is adapting to that decreased presence of oxygen that you can bring in, but it's not detrimental, because if you're riding at too high of an elevation, many times it makes it so hard for your body to recover after that ride that you actually end up adding a lot of fatigue, and so your training becomes less effective because you're not able to absorb it. I don't know if that makes sense. But basically, if you train high and you recover high, you're train depleted, but you also recover depleted. Mm-hmm. So in many cases, you'll see that a lot of people, they train high and then they recover low. And that's to allow them, like, Team Sky is famous for doing this, and they go to the places like Tenerife where they can train up high at elevation, then they sleep down at sea level, and they do that sort of thing. So it's not that you're just looking to get as high as you possibly can. You're kind of hoping to hit that sweet spot, because it still matters in terms of dosing your body with training, and then also getting the recovery you need. It still matters. The other thing that I want to add in is the fact that when you are in a situation where you're looking at I guess a lot of people have the whole thing, should I come up to Leadville a day before, or should I come up 2 weeks before? And the common wisdom has been day before or 2 weeks, something around there. However, a recent study is actually pulling all of that into question, and it was done with Team Sky, and we don't really know a whole lot quite yet. It's kind of shifting in terms of what the scientific data says here. But basically, they showed that on day 1, they were the worst, and then day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, day 7, they were progressively better until they actually weren't that far off at day 7. So keep your eye on that space. The one thing I can say, though, is for a lot of people, they cannot, like you said, you can't train at high elevation, or it's not easy to do so. And there's actually a study that does have some really solid evidence behind it that shows that if you train in heat and go through the process of heat adaptation, you actually experience a lot of similar benefits that you get from elevation training, which is kind of interesting. So you experience increased plasma volume. You end up basically at a cellular level, you get a better tolerance and better response to that lack of oxygen that you see. So even though you may not be able to go to Leadville like you, Eldon, a privileged life you lead, but even though many of us cannot get up there, the great thing for a lot of people that live at lower elevation, especially in most cases, those usually tend to be hotter regions, if you expose yourself to heat more regularly, whether in training and outside of training, you'll actually start to get a lot of benefits that people get when they train at elevation.
Well, is it too late to start that now, Jonathan? Could we still see gains if we were to go out 3 weeks out from Leadville and purposely train in the heat? Are we going to see something, or are we just going to get fatigued?
Yeah, so it varied a bit person to person in the study. And you can look up that study. It was published by a number of different doctors from the University of Bath in the UK. And it's called, it's quite a long name, but cross-acclimation between heat and hypoxia. Heat acclimation improves cellular tolerance and exercise performance in acute normobaric hypoxia. So rolls off the tongue. But with that, what we learned from this study is, like you said, usually you start to see those adaptations as soon as 2 weeks away, or 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, you'll start to see a lot of those adaptations actually render a performance benefit. Now, you'll actually start to get those adaptations in your body much quicker, though. So I don't know if it's just the fact that the science hasn't proven, or we don't have a high enough resolution to prove that performance benefit until a couple weeks out, but the changes start to happen almost immediately. I've actually utilized this before, not necessarily for elevation training, but I've done heat training. And you don't want to do your super high or high intensity workouts. I mean, you can, but if your goal is just to do heat training, you don't really want to pair it with the really high intensity workouts, because with more heat, it's a lot harder for your body to hit the marks when it's really high intensity. So if it's an easier workout, like, just a recovery workout or something like that, as long as it's not too stressful, you can do those in a really hot environment. Or if you don't have anything hot outside, man, I've been the weird guy that's actually trained in the bathroom with the shower on, and keeping it really hot and humid in there with a heater, and it's been functional, and it's helped a lot. So you can go through that process. It doesn't have to be humid or dry. They say that dry basically gives the necessary benefit. Humid just introduces the heat regulation response from your body, aka sweating a little bit more. So you can, do it humid or dry if you want, but it really does. It helps. It improves performance. So it's kind of an interesting thing. If you're 2-3 weeks out, still game, still ready to get some improvements.
Thanks so much for that,
Awesome.
Jonathan, and look forward to talking to you again next week.
Chat soon.
So a second of real talk here, Hadi. How are you about training in the heat?
Well, if I said I went out and trained in the heat on purpose, I'd be lying. Here's how I deal with the heat. If I have a training day scheduled, especially if it's a Saturday or Sunday, a weekend day when it's you got to get it in, and it's going to be hot out, I don't hold back. I don't alter plans. If it's part of my regular build schedule, I'm going to go out there and ride in the heat. Will I try to get an hour or so earlier jump? Absolutely, just to try and mitigate some of that heat factor. If I'm closer to race day and I'm a little worried about fatigue or about overdoing it, I'm lucky enough, I live near the coast. I can keep a ride closer to the coast and stay out of the mountains or the Santa Monica Mountains in particular, where it does get really very hot. That said, I mean, I love what Jonathan had to say about heat training. In fact, leading into the Crusher, I did go out on a hot day and do purposely a pretty warmish ride, and I had a great day at Crusher in the end.
Yeah. I totally respect what he has to say. And people who are happy to seek out heat in order to get a benefit that is similar to altitude training, a tip of the hat and kudos and everything else to them. But I'm just going to come out and say it. I hate heat training. I just do. I do everything I can to ride early or late or up in the mountains. I'm just not going to train in the heat, period.
Yeah, it is misery. I've actually seen this put to a win once, too. A buddy of mine, we were facing a very hot day on a road race, and we knew days or actually weeks before, he went out to Palm Springs and purposely went out, and he sweated and rode in the heat, and a couple weeks later, he came out to a course here locally and just took everyone. It was miserable that day, too, race-wise. It was over 105 degrees, and he took it to him, though, and a little heat training, I guess, can pay off at times. Hey, Fatty, as we put the wraps on this one, we'd like to remind everyone that this podcast can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Music, and the home website, Leadville100podcast.com. Subscribing, rating, and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts helps others who've caught the endurance cycling bug find us.
Yeah, and if you have questions for us or ideas for us, head on over to the website's comment section, get in touch. Also follow me on Twitter. I am @FatCyclist. I am on Facebook @Eldon Nelson, which happens to be my name. And of course, we're both active in the Leadville 100 MTB participants group. We always post when we put up a new episode of this podcast, so an easy way for you to know when we've got something new in your feed.
Yeah, great Facebook page too. Good place to exchange ideas with other Leadville folks who are headed for the 100 mountain bike race. Now, good luck in your training. Thanks for listening. We'll see you at the finish line.
Less than 3 weeks, guys. Don't freak out. Just don't freak out.